The invisible hand that let go. For decades, it was always there. Steady, reliable, unquestioned. When things drifted too far, it intervened. When balance wavered, it restored order. And then quietly it stopped. To understand why this matters now, we have to revisit the belief that markets were never truly alone. That behind every extreme, every imbalance, there existed an invisible force ready to step in. A stabilizer, a backstop, not always visible, but always assumed. This belief shaped behavior across the system. Risk felt containable. Extremes felt temporary. Participants acted with confidence, knowing that if something went wrong, correction would arrive. The invisible hand wasn't debated. It was priced in. The first reveal begins when that presence became less obvious. Interventions arrived later. Adjustments felt smaller. Responses that once felt decisive now felt cautious. Nothing announced a change, but something fundamental had shifted. The hand was still there, just less willing. The second reveal appeared in how participants adapted. Risk-taking didn't stop, but it changed character. Positions were structured to survive without rescue. Hedging increased quietly. Expectations softened. The system began behaving as if support might not come on time. The third reveal emerged through reaction to stress. When minor pressure appeared, response was delayed. Markets adjusted themselves instead of waiting. The invisible hand no longer reached automatically. And without realizing it, participants began carrying responsibility they once assumed was shared. This was not abandonment. It was withdrawal. And withdrawal matters because systems behave very differently when support is optional instead of guaranteed. Confidence becomes conditional. Risk becomes personal. Stability becomes something to earn rather than expect. The market still functioned, but it was functioning without a silent promise it had relied on for years. And once that promise fades, every future decision changes, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. What followed would reveal how markets behave when an invisible hand lets go, and why the most powerful shifts are often the ones that happen without announcement. As the invisible hand loosened its grip, the market began adjusting in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Nothing dramatic changed overnight. Prices still stabilized. Volatility remained contained. But the confidence that once came from assumed intervention started to erode. The conflict emerged in expectation. Participants no longer acted with the same certainty that correction would arrive on schedule. Risk wasn't abandoned. It was recalculated. Trades were structured with exits in mind. Time horizons shortened. The market still believed in balance, but it no longer trusted balance to arrive automatically. Liquidity reflected this shift immediately. Capital stayed present, but it hesitated to lead. Support appeared later than before. Depth felt conditional. The market could still absorb pressure, but it preferred to see how much pressure was coming first. The invisible hand had trained patience into the system. The tension deepened as this behavior repeated. Each delayed intervention reinforced the next. Participants learned that stabilization might come, but not quickly and not decisively. That uncertainty changed behavior more than any policy shift ever could. Institutional desks adapted quietly. Risk committees met more often. Hedging increased subtly. Exposure remained, but conviction softened. Decisions that once relied on assumed support now required justification. The system wasn't panicking. It was recalibrating. Derivatives markets told the same story beneath the surface. Protection stayed bid even during calm sessions. Skew refused to relax. Traders weren't hedging collapse. They were hedging abandonment. The risk wasn't disaster. It was being left alone with it. The buildup continued as responsibility shifted inward. Markets that once leaned on external correction began leaning on themselves. That sounds healthy, but it changes dynamics. Self-correction is slower, heavier, and less forgiving when confidence is thin. Veteran participants recognize the shift clearly. Markets behave differently when support is optional. Moves extend further. Responses arrive later. Small imbalances matter more. The invisible hand hadn't vanished, but it no longer moved first. The market was learning a new rule. Intervention was no longer guaranteed. And the next phase would show what happens when that realization meets real pressure. when the system is forced to discover whether it can truly stand on its own without the hand it once assumed would always catch it. Because when support becomes conditional, every move carries more weight than before. That test arrived when pressure appeared that demanded more than patience. Not a crisis, not a shock, just a sustained imbalance that would once have triggered a clear response. This time, nothing stepped in. Prices drifted further than expected. Support appeared briefly, then faded. Participants watched closely, waiting for the familiar signal that stabilization was coming. It didn't. The invisible hand didn't rush. It observed. The conflict intensified as realization spread. Without immediate intervention, responsibility shifted fully onto participants. Buyers hesitated, unsure how much downside they now owned. Sellers pressed cautiously, sensing the absence of restraint. The market wasn't panicking. It was recalculating its limits. Liquidity exposed a shift clearly. Depth existed, but it refused to lead. Capital waited for confirmation that support would hold before committing. In the past, belief in intervention filled that gap. Now, the gap stayed open. Institutional systems reacted carefully. Algorithms adjusted slower. Risk controls tightened incrementally. Committees debated whether conditions justified response. Every delay reinforced the same message. Support was no longer automatic. The buildup accelerated as correlations tightened. Assets that once stabilized each other moved together. Without an external anchor, the system became more self-referential. Moves fed on themselves. Adjustment became heavier with each step. Veteran participants recognized the danger immediately. Markets can survive volatility. They struggle with uncertainty about boundaries. When no one knows where intervention begins, risk expands psychologically before it expands in price. As pressure persisted, familiar levels failed quietly, not because they were attacked, but because belief in defense was gone. The market adjusted lower in stages, each one confirming that the invisible hand was not stepping in early. That was the turning point. The invisible hand hadn't disappeared. It had chosen not to act, and that choice mattered more than any intervention ever could. The final phase would reveal what happens when markets finally accept that support is conditional, and how behavior changes once participants understand they are standing alone. Because once the invisible hand lets go, the market doesn't collapse. It grows heavier, and every step forward carries more consequence than before. Acceptance arrived before recovery. Once participants understood that support would not arrive on command, behavior changed decisively. The market stopped waiting for rescue and started pricing responsibility. That was the climax. Not the absence of intervention, but the moment the system accepted it. Prices adjusted until risk felt owned rather than shared. Liquidity returned selectively, but with conditions. Capital stepped in only when value was clear, not because it expected protection. Support formed lower, firmer, and without expectation of immediate relief. What surprised many was how stabilizing this felt. Without the illusion of guaranteed intervention, decisions became clearer. Participants stopped negotiating with hope and started acting on reality. Volatility didn't vanish, but became more honest. As the adjustment settled, the resolution unfolded through discipline. Positioning became deliberate. Time horizons lengthened again, but cautiously. The market found balance not through rescue, but through accountability. The invisible hand hadn't vanished. It had forced maturity. The deeper lesson lingered beneath every move that followed. Intervention shapes behavior long after it happens, and withdrawal reshapes it even more. When support is assumed, risk expands. When support is conditional, risk is respected. Markets don't need constant rescue. They need clear boundaries. Because the most destabilizing force isn't volatility. It's uncertainty about who absorbs it. Once that uncertainty is resolved, even difficult conditions become navigable. The invisible hand that let go didn't abandon the market. It taught it that stability without responsibility is fragile. And responsibility, once reclaimed, becomes the strongest stabilizer of all. So what do you think? Are markets today acting with the discipline of independence, or are they still waiting for a hand that may not reach out again? The